Yo, welcome back everybody to a brand new video here on the second channel, and today we're doing a tier list video for Peoria. Of course, Peoria Regionals is this weekend in a couple of days, and with the brand new set and the meta actually looking a lot different than it was in Pittsburgh, I think we're in for a pretty fun and a pretty awesome tournament. And I decided to do a tier list ranking every single possible good deck that will probably be good for the tournament, and we're going to see what decks kind of rank where on this tier list. I've basically just included all the potential good decks. I haven't included any fringier stuff like Alakazam or Arbok like I did in my 151 tier list video I did a few weeks back. But I did want to do a tier list here for Peoria, like I always do when we are heading up to regionals, to kind of give my thoughts on the meta. And I think it's pretty important to do a tier list now that we kind of have the meta game for the 151 Peoria Regionals kind of thing going on. I just did a video yesterday where I looked at the top 10 best decks in the format heading into Peoria, and I kind of wanted to clear up any thoughts and stuff I had with this tier list. I will leave a link to the tier list down below if you want to go try it yourself. And of course, if you're new to the second channel, make sure to click that subscribe button down below. It helped me on the road to reaching 9,000 subs here. And also leave a like on the video if you go on to enjoy. It'd be greatly appreciated. And without further ado, let's get into the tier list. So I wanted to start off with the elephant in the room, Charizard. Charizard, going into Pittsburgh, I kind of said it was a bad deck. It kind of underperformed, didn't really do that well. But now that we are heading to Peoria, all of a sudden Charizard is looking like it's a potential top tier deck, which is crazy to me, but Charizard has kind of been figured out. There's 4 different versions of the deck right now, all of which are different and have their own unique playstyle, and I think that all 4 builds are pretty solid. We'll start things off with Gallade Charizard, the one from Japan. This deck definitely seems good. I'm going to put it in tier 1.5. I don't think it is the best way to play Charizard, but I do think that it is the more tactical way. One of the things that makes Charizard such a good deck is it's very easy to play. Charizard is one of the most brain-dead decks in the meta, in my opinion, right now. And I think that's one of the things that makes it attractive, is you don't really have to think when playing Charizard. But Galadezard, there is a bit more thinking you have to do. My issue with Galadezard is that it's very weak to Lost Box. Out of all the Charizard builds, I think Galadezard is the one that has the harder Lost Zone matchup, due to the fact that you're going to have a bunch of Curlias in play that are easy food for Sableye. You can evolve them into Gallade, and you do have free control. Gallade and Curlia is essentially budget Pidgeot, because technically with Curlia's draw power and Gallade's ability, you're technically doing the same thing Pidgeot would be doing. A lot of the time Pidgeot's either getting you rare candy or a supporter, whereas, Curly Gallade, you're still kind of doing the same thing. So I do think that this build definitely has potential. You can also control how many Zards you put into play, thanks to the ability to just not rare candy Charizard spam like you would in the other builds. I do think this build has potential, and there are other cool ideas with the deck. The deck does play Reverse Energy, which in my opinion can open up the door for some really cool tech cards. I've even considered trying out Luxray in my Gallade Zard deck to kind of give you a better Lugia matchup. But I do like the deck a lot. I think it's cool. I think its Lost Zone matchup will hold it back, but we might see 1 or 2 Gallade Zards go far in Peoria. It is definitely a solid build. Next up, we have the Arceus Pidgeot build. I wanted to talk about this real quick. The original way to play Charizard. Now, this build is still pretty solid. My issue with Pidgeot Zard is that, or Pidgeot Arc Zard, is that you have a lot of liabilities in play that are 2-prizers, right? The nice thing about playing the other versions of Charizard is you don't have the Arceus in play. The Arceus is really good. Arceus is fantastic. It easily sets you up your Charizards. Makes it super easy to get turn 2 Zard and Pidgeot. The problem is, Arceus is not the greatest Pokemon to have in play, because then it makes it easy for your opponent to prize map. They can go knock out Arceus, knock out Pidgeot, knock out 1 Charizard, as opposed to having to go through potentially 2 to 3 Charizards. And that's the issue with playing the Arceus build. I think it's fine. I probably think it's better than the Gallade build. It does still have a good Lost Zone matchup, because you have all these huge Pokemon in play, but I do think that the liability of having Arceus in play can be kind of too much. If I'm playing the deck, I would maybe think of playing a Charon's Care in the deck to try to remove the Arceus from the board as soon as possible. Make it a one-and-done thing. But the Arceus has to take damage, though, which is kind of a problem. So, I don't know. I'm not sold on the deck. Maybe play it. Maybe don't. I think it's fine. I think Arceus Pidgeot Zard is fine. My other issue is it is a bit weaker to path, obviously, because a lot of your deck relies on abilities, and you don't have the free reign to get rid of path as easily in this deck. So, it's fine. I think it's a decent deck, and it's still fine nonetheless. Next up, we have the Arven build. I think this is probably the best way to play Charizard. I'm maybe going to be... I don't know if it's a tier 1 deck. I do think well, actually, maybe Arvenizard is a tier 1 deck. I think Arvenizard is a very good deck right now. It's probably the best way to play Charizard at the moment, because this build does lend you the ability to have, just Charizards in play, maybe 1 Pidgeot, as opposed to having Arceus, Pidgeot, Charizard in play, which your opponent can easily prize map. Whereas this build's a little bit more lenient towards just having Charizards in play. You might have like a Manaphy or a Mew in play, but that's not a big deal, right? The deck also plays Penny, so you play the Luminion, you play the NTV down, you can Penny it off the board pretty easily so that you can still utilize your board state just being Charizards. I think this deck is pretty solid. It has a lot of power. Arven is a great card against Path because Arven is technically a bump the Path. You just play a couple Lost Vacuum, and all your Arvens become technically a Path counter, which is pretty cool. So that's one of the benefits of playing the Arven's build, is that you do get access to easy Path bumps if you ever run into it. Yeah, the deck's good. I think it's maybe the best way to play it. I think a lot of people right now will also agree with me in saying that Arven's is the best way to play Charizard. We'll have to see how Arven's performs. I definitely think it's the best way to play the deck right now, and I'm going to put it up in Tier 1. I think it's the best way to play it, and the one that I think will be the most popular. Lost Zone Charizard. Now, this one is kind of a weird build. I think it's still a Tier 1.5 deck. A lot of people will say this deck isn't very good, and a lot of people will say it is good. There's actually some people that are believers that this is actually the best way to play the deck. Now, the benefit of this deck is that you have access to Sableye and Cramorant, and maybe even Greninja if you want to go down the route of playing Mirage Gate Water Energy, which you can cut or you can keep. But yeah, the ability to play Sableye and Cram is really good, right? Cram is great with Charizard's attack to set up a 2-hit KO. Sableye is really good to clean stuff up. Also really good against any single prize matchup like Tina. They have the Comfies in play, obviously Turbo Lost Box, stuff like that. Mirror Match is really good. The problem with this deck is you don't have that free reign control like you do with the Pidgeot build. And that's one of the trade-offs you get. While you do get these really good one-prize attackers, you do lose access to the free reign that you get with Pidgeot, whereas with the Pidgeot and even the Gallade build, you're able to easily find whatever you want a lot of the time. You're able to Curly into what you need, you're able to Gallade out a supporter, you're able to Pidgeot into a supporter. You can't do that with this deck, unfortunately. It doesn't play Pidgeot, so you're kind of stuck with what you got, with what you're Comfing into, what you're Greninjing into, what your Colress gets you. You're not able to kind of have that free reign control, and that's one of the problems I think this deck suffers, is while you do gain these really good one-prizers, you just don't have that, free reign control you do with Pidgeot. And ultimately, that's going to hold Lost Zone Charizard back. I think it is maybe the worst build. I don't think it's a bad deck by any means. It just isn't the best way to play it. Guardy's probably BDIF. I think Gardevoir is just insane right now. Whether or not you're playing any new cards like Mew EX is up to you, but I think Gardevoir is just fantastic. Reversal Guardy's really good. The Tord build with the double reversal, I think, is optimal right now. Gardevoir is probably going to want to play multiple Collapse Stadium and multiple Temple of Sinnohs to try to counter Lugia, and to try to also kind of, use the Collapse tactically when you're, ready to get rid of your Gardevoir EX off the board, especially in the Charizard matchup. If you're going to play the deck, you probably want to play Penny just so that you can counter the Mawwiles. Mawile might see a bit of an uptick in play in Peoria, so I would probably consider playing Penny or a switching card in Gardevoir this weekend if I were to play it. Or, just don't bench Greninja against Mawile, obviously. Like, if you're opponent Mawwiles, you literally just concede immediately and just go to the next game and just don't bench Greninja. Gardevoir is actually not bad against Charizard. Like, you would think this matchup is bad because, ooh, big dark Pokemon, scary, but not really. Gardevoir, just can easily KO Charizard. You can go Zacian, one Charizard, Reversal Energy, Shiny Arcana Guardian, another Charizard. Pidgeot isn't too hard to KO either. Yeah, I think Guardy's a pretty good deck. It's got a great matchup spread. I think its worst matchups are going to be, like, Turbo Lost Box, maybe Chien-Pao too. But Guardy is just a great deck, and I think it's still in contention for BDIF right now. Arcdura, probably Tier 2.5. I'm a fan of Arcdura, but I don't think it's great. It does seem good right now. The benefit of playing Arcdura is that with the popularity of Lugia, Arcdura seems like a great play, right? Lugia is everywhere right now. Like, the chances you hit even just 3 Lugia in day 1 of Peoria is pretty high. You hit 3 Lugia, should hopefully be an easy, three wins right there. The issue is you're not really great against much other decks other than just Lugia, right? The Duraludon is not good into other matchups. It's not great against Charizard, in my opinion. You're not that great into Tina. Lost Tina is still an abysmal matchup. Yeah, I don't know how this deck kind of corrects its bad matchups. I also think its matchup against Chien-Pao and Miraidon is also pretty bad. Whether or not you're playing Duraludon with Umbreon or you're playing it with some other attacker, I've seen obviously the Leafeon build of the deck to kind of give you a better matchup against Charizard is up to you. I think Arcdura's potential is there, and maybe we're just sleeping on what you want to pair the Duraludon with. Like, what are you going to play Duraludon with, right? Are you going to play it with the Umbreon or not? And that's going to be the thing I think that's going to kind of hold Duraludon back is, well, it is good against Lugia, and Lugia is very popular. Nobody's really playing Urshifu Lugia right now. While they do have Mew against you, they'll Mew your Duraludon, hit you by copying G-Max Pulverization. You knock out their Mew, you send a Lost Zone, and then it's like, you don't have 2 Mew? All right, how you dealing with this Duraludon now, right? You know what I mean? And with Urshifu being nowhere to be seen, it seems like a pretty good call for Peoria. Again, you just have to figure out how you're going to beat other matchups in the meta, right? Like, you can play the Umbreon, and then maybe your matchup against Guardy's good. I mean, Guardy's still going to be pretty good, in my opinion, very popular. But, then it's like, okay, well, the Umbreon's not going to help you in that many other matchups. Arctura's matchup against Lost Box, other than, Kyogre isn't bad either. So you still boast, like, okay matchups against, like, Lost Box, obviously Lugia, but you just got to figure out how to beat other decks in the format right now. And you have to find a good partner for the Duraludon in order for the deck to be good. Speaking of Lugia, we got a couple Lugia variants here. We got Lugia Colorless. Now, this deck is probably tier 1. I think Colorless Lugia is very good right now. It is extremely popular in online tourneys, and we'll see if that translates well into Peoria. Colorless Lugia does seem very solid, though. My down, kind of issue is it doesn't really have that raw damage potential that the single strike build has. It does still have the tactical plays. You got the Snorlax, you got the Drapion, you got the Weird Ear potentially if you want to play it. You got Luxray if you want to play it. You got Radiant Charizard if you want to play it. You have the Mew EXs. I actually am a fan of playing 2 Mew in Colorless Lugia because people are just sleeping on how good Mew is. Like, 2 Mew is like literally just going to win you the game against Lost Tina. Like, I think that 2 Mew is actually the way to go with Colorless Lugia. But yeah, Colorless Lugia is really good right now. Heading into Peoria, I think it's a tier 1 deck. We'll see where it falls after Peoria, but I definitely think Lugia Colorless is great right now. Its Charizard matchup could be shaky, but the way to beat Charizard is you essentially have to use a 1 prizer. You have to try to manipulate the prize trade so that Charizard goes into the Mew knockout, right? Because what you want to do is you want to give him like a Snorlax or something at one point, and then what happens is they go down to 1 prize remaining, and then you KO with Mew. That's kind of how you navigate the Charizard matchup. The matchup's pretty good if you hit first against Charizard, because you can trade really well with Lugia. Single Strike Lugia, I think, is also maybe a tier 1.5, maybe slightly worse than Colorless Lugia heading into Peoria. I still think Single Strike is great, though. I mean, you do get that insane damage with Tyranitar. Tyranitar is just ridiculous, man. Tyranitar is so good. And that's the draw with playing Lugia here, Single Strike, is that, well, you don't have the, you don't have, like, the greatest, single prize, option route with the Mew and the Snorlax. You do get some pretty good power with T-Tar. T-Tar is still fantastic. I mean, it's going to be so good against Inteleon and Urshifu, and pretty good against Mew, obviously, and it's also going to be very good in the mirror. I think that Lugia I think Single Strike washes Colorless Lugia in mirror matches, and you can still play Mew in the deck if you want to. My issue with Single Strike is you have a pretty awkward Charizard matchup, and that's the thing that holds it back, is its Charizard matchup is extremely shaky right now. It's still great into, like, everything else except for maybe Charizard, so I don't know. If you want to play the Cobalion, you can. Cobalion does make the matchup a little bit more tolerable, but I don't know. I think Single Strike Lugia is a fantastic deck still, but again, with that shaky Charizard matchup, it's, up in the air whether or not you should play it or not, but it's definitely a pretty good deck still, and I wouldn't say that it's the worst build. I mean, you could even debate that it's better than Colorless. I mean, there might be some people out there that will make the argument that Single Strike Lugia is better than Colorless Lugia right now. We got Double Turbo Mew, probably tier 2. I've seen some ramblings of Mew kind of, moving in the format. My issue with Mew, obviously, Charizard is extremely popular right now, and Charizard has kind of bullied Mew out of the format. Well, cards like Spiritomb are kind of non-existent right now, and Drapion is still kind of, it's here and there. I mean, Lugia plays it, Colorless Lugia plays it, Turbo Lost Box might play it, but overall, Mew is still kind of wavering. I do think that you still kind of have good matchup spreads against a lot of decks. It's just that Charizard matchup's going to be shaky. There have been ramblings about playing Double Turbo Mew with Snatcher so that you can judge pass Snatcher away Charizard to make it really hard for the opponent to attack you. I think that's probably the best way to play Double Turbo Mew, is maybe try it out with Snatcher to try to fix your matchup against Charizard. You can even use Snatcher against, like, Archeops and stuff. Snatcher and Mew seems like a pretty nasty combo the more I think about it. But yeah, I think that Mew's pretty good still. It's just you got to figure out that Charizard matchup. The deck's still fine. I think we're still going to see, like, a couple Mews do well in the tournament. Someone might just dodge Charizard altogether and just kind of have a good time in total. Next up, we're going to talk about some Arc piles. Arc Drago is probably Rogue. Arc Tina is probably tier 2.5 alongside Arc Dura. Arc does just feel bad right now, right? Your Lugia matchup shaky, depending on whether or not you're playing the Duraludon or Flying Pikachu. Charizard, I think, is also a bad matchup, whether or not you're playing Heavy Path / a Grass Attacker. And then I also think that Arceus struggles a lot against Lost Tina. That's another abysmal matchup. Chien-Pao is pretty difficult. Miraidon is also not a great matchup. Mew can be pretty bad too, whether or not you're playing Spiritomb or if you're playing an Umbreon or something. But yeah, Arctina's fine. I mean, the nice thing about Arctina is you can still play you can play either Pikachu or Superior if you want to go down the route of Pikachu to kind of have a better matchup into, like, Chien-Pao and Lugia, or play the Superior to have an easier matchup into Charizard. It's up to you. Both builds are actually not terrible right now. Arctina's fine. Is it better than Arcdura? Maybe. I don't know. I mean, it's just kind of Arctina. Arctina's matchup against Lost Tina, though, isn't terrible, though. That's one of the nice things about it, is matchup against Lost Tina isn't terrible because you do have your Giratina, so as long as you can kind of trade in that matchup, it's not too bad, especially if you play a V-Guard energy on your Tina before they start Requiem it. It's actually not that bad of a matchup if you go first. If they don't path you turn one, it's also pretty good. I mean, if Tina pass you turn one and you don't get Starbirth, that matchup is pretty abysmal. But if you can dodge it, it's not too bad. Slack King Arceus and Guja Arceus are probably rogue. I mean, they're cool archetypes, and somebody could play one and do well with it. Don't get me wrong, but I think for now they're just rogue. Next, we got to talk about Miraidon. Yeah, good old Miraidon. So, I think there's two ways to play Miraidon. There's Regieleki build. We'll put that in Rogue. People will probably agree that Regieleki Miraidon isn't that great right now. It is cool. Don't get me wrong. I mean, Regieleki, let's hit some pretty high numbers. And maybe you can use Regielekis to try to KO a Charizard with, like, justified gloves. I don't know. But then we have the Miraidon, like, deck with Mew and stuff. This is probably tier 1.5. Miraidon's cool. My issue with Miraidon is that its Charizard matchup and Guardy matchup are not very good. Those are the two matchups that I'm scared of. I also think your Kyogre matchup's pretty bad too, obviously. So you have like 3 bad matchups right there. The reason why Charizard is bad is because, well, you can use Raichu and maybe even Mew depending on the scenario. I mean, well, a lot of the time Charizard's not going to take a 1-prize knockout, right? As soon as you take a knockout, Charizard's just KOing your Raikus and Raichus. And even your Miraidon is not safe if they're playing Vitality Band. That's my issue with playing Miraidon against Charizard. And it's so hard to get back-to-back 6 energy to KO 2 Charizards. So that's my issue with Miraidon. Lugia's not bad, though. With the popularity of Lugia right now, I think Miraidon's pretty good. Even if they have Dunsparce, the matchup still isn't terrible. So I do think Miraidon's got some potential, maybe as a tier 1.5, and maybe even, I don't know, I don't want to put in tier 2. I don't think the deck is that bad. Like, it's definitely not a tier 2 deck, but definitely more kind of bordering on, like, tier 1.5 right now. Next up, we got Chien-Pao. I think it's also another a good tier 1.5, maybe even, like, higher up on the tier list. Chien-Pao is really good. I'm a huge fan of the Bibarel build, not the Palkia, Chien-Pao or the Arc Chien-Pao deck. I think that the best way to play Baxcalibur Chien-Pao is to play it with the Bibarels. And I think it's the most consistent way because you can put all the 1-prizers in play and kind of force into the Chien-Pao. You don't have to immediately bench out a 2-prizer. Nice thing about Chien-Pao, it has a great matchup against Charizard. It's so good because, like, it's so easy to KO Charizard with Chien-Pao. A lot of decks right now really are like, they can maybe KO 1 Charizard with, like, a grass Pokemon that KO you. But then it's like, well, how do you deal with 2 Charizards? And that's where Chien-Pao comes in handy, where Chien-Pao can actually KO 2 Charizards, 3 Charizards without a sweat. The problem with Chien-Pao, obviously, is just going to be your Baxcaliburs will always be getting bossed, and Charizard isn't, it's not hard for them to do that. I do think that Chien-Pao is a great deck, though, and I personally would, honestly, it's a deck I would consider bringing to Peoria. If I was going, I would have Chien-Pao on my list of things to play. I think it's a pretty solid deck. A lot of people are maybe sleeping on it. I think it's also got a good Guardy matchup, and its Lugia matchup's not bad either. That's another thing. I think Chien-Pao has an okay Lugia matchup. Next up, we have Darkrai. Probably a rogue deck. I mean, there's all those Darkrai believers out there. Probably not going to go very far, though. Rapid Strike, another tier 1.5. Rapid Strike's actually been doing pretty good right now in the format, to be honest. I actually don't think Rapid Strike is a bad deck right now. Heading to Peoria, it's not a bad play. Mew's on the downswing, which is great. And then also, Lugia is also not, like, super, it's bad, but, like, you can beat Lugia, too. I mean, Single Strike Lugia is probably your worst matchup. Colorless Lugia I actually think isn't that bad for Rapid Strike. But yeah, Rapid Strike's a pretty good deck. It's got a good Zard matchup, in my opinion. A good Rapid Strike player can be Charizard, because it's not just, you just control the board. You just don't knock out Charizard so they can't do more than 180 damage. You can Yoga Loop their Charmanders. It's really not that bad of a matchup. It's also got a good Guardy matchup. Yeah, it's got a good Lost Zone matchup. I think that Rapid Strike's in a great spot right now. It's maybe a tier 1.5 deck. It's like legit that good of a deck. It's probably the sleeper deck of the format right now. Next up is the Lost Zone variant. Start things off with Turbo Lost Box. Probably tier 1, maybe even BDIF status. Probably more or less just tier 1 right now. Turbo Lost Box isn't a bad deck at the moment. It's doing pretty good in online tourneys. It can adapt to the format. With Charizard being everywhere, Turbo Lost Box can start playing, Shaman or Atropius. There's all kinds of grass Pokemon you could theoretically play, right? Turbo Lost Box is still a good deck, right? Sableye is a very good card. Turbo Mirage Gate is still really good. Turbo Lost Box can also play Mew EX. That's another new card that the deck actually could play. So there's a lot of room for improvement within Turbo Lost Box, right? It can play stuff like Mew EX. It can play all kinds of cards. Yeah, I think that Turbo Lost Box is still a good deck right now. And I personally wouldn't mind seeing it do well because it's a good deck and it definitely has room to adapt to the format, right? So very good deck. Still going to be very popular in Peoria. In fact, wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the top players are going to be on Turbo Lost Box. Lost Zone Gudra, probably tier 2.5. This deck is a sleeper deck, but it is starting to kind of do well in online tourneys. Playing it with Mew EX, Sableye, Zamazenta seems like the way to play it. Gudra's not a bad deck at all. I actually think it's pretty cool, and could be time for it to rise in stonks. I mean, for right now, heading to Peoria, it's probably tier 2.5. It feels like a sleeper deck, kind of like if you were to roll up with Duraludon, right, in that kind of vein. But Gudra's pretty good, man. I mean, it's good against Lugia. Gudra's not bad against Charizard either, due to Charizard's low damage output, Moisture Star, and the fact you can play Sableye, Mew, and Zamazenta, which are all pretty good against Charizard. And then we have Kyogre Lost Box, probably tier 1, 2, right? Kyogre's still fantastic. Kyogre's matchup into Charizard is shaky because, again, you can't use Kyogre against Charizard EX, but Kyogre's just great against anything else, to be honest. It's good against Lugia. That's like the main selling point of playing Kyogre is how good it is against Lugia right now. Yeah, Kyogre just has to adapt, right? You can play Andrew Strada's list from Pittsburgh, or you can adapt. You can change the list. You can maybe play a Grass Attacker, which would greatly improve your Charizard. Because at the end of the day, you are a Turbo Lost Zone deck with just having the Kyogre late game option, right? That's kind of what you are. You're still like basically a modified Turbo build of Lost Box. And you can, again, still play like a Grass Pokemon, like a Shaman or a Tropius, and try to improve the matchup. You can play Mew EX in the deck, too, if you want. So Kyogre's still great. I think it's still a very solid deck. Still tier 1. And I think there's going to be some good players on Kyogre this weekend, 100%. Lostina is probably also in BDIF status. It's weird. This deck gets a lot of hate. A lot of people say it's bad. A lot of people say it's good. I think it's still kind of wavering in like BDIF status, kind of around there, because it is good against Charizard. I think it's actually not too terrible into other decks. The main thing is that it just washes Charizard. If you want to have a great matchup into Charizard, play Lostina. Like, it's so good. You don't even need to play like Shaman or anything. You just literally just beat Charizard with Star Requiem and Lost Impact. But yeah, Giratina, Lost Box, very, very good. Very good deck right now. Still going to be popular in Peoria. I think it's a default deck for a lot of people going into the tournament. They don't know what to play. Yeah, great deck and very good. Probably still BDIF. And maybe after the tournament, this deck is going to fall like tier 1.5, tier 1. Going into the tournament, I think we can say it's probably still like in the BDIF discussion. Sableye Cramzard's probably tier 2. The ability to get like potentially like turn 2 Sableye with the deck is really good. That's kind of the way to play right now. But ultimately, the deck is kind of held back by just not being as good as maybe Turbo or Kyogre. Still a decent archetype, though. And, I mean, somebody will probably play it and do well with it. I think it's still, like, one of those decks that has fans, has people that like to play it, and will do well. And yeah, Radiant Zard isn't bad. I mean, this deck also has a great Charizard matchup. That's one of the cool things, is it has good Charizard matchup. My other issue, though, I guess, is Lost City. Some Charizard lists are playing Lost City right now, which is another issue I wanted to mention. Obviously, Radiant Charizard is really good when Lost City isn't popular. Lost City is actually pretty popular right now in Charizard. I mean, the Arvanzard build plays 2 of them. Maybe Arczard is going to start playing 2 of them. Yeah, that's one of the other scary things about playing the deck. It's also, I mean, I guess the other thing, Radiant Zard isn't bad against Lugia, due to the fact that you do get that Radiant Charizard attacker. Lugia obviously not playing Lost City, so Lugia isn't a bad matchup either. If they're not playing Radiant Serena, the matchup's good. I mean, it is scary if they have Snorlax, but you can always Sableye around the Snorlax, and then, like, Radiant Zard the Snorlax something. I think the matchup against Lugia isn't too bad either for Sableye Cramzard. Meowscarada is probably a rogue deck. No, not tier 2.5, probably rogue. It is a cool archetype, and, with Charizard being popular, man, I mean, if somebody played it and made day 2, that it would be awesome to see. It's possible. Like, the deck isn't that bad of a deck. It's kind of like a diet Rapid Strike deck where it has a slightly better Charizard matchup. That's basically the way you look at it. Fusion Mew. I think Fusion Mew is probably tier 1.5. It's better than DT Mew right now, in my opinion, because you still have access to, like, Meloetta. The way that people are playing Fusion Mew right now is actually with Pokemon Catcher, so that you can try to get like a turn 1 donk with Meloetta on like a Lugia or something, and it's pretty good. I mean, I think Fusion Mew and DT Mew are both fine decks. I think both can kind of adapt to try to figure out how to beat Charizard. Again, the DT build can play like Snatchers, where the Fusion build can play the Meloetta, which Meloetta's not bad against Charizard. It lets you have a nice one-prize attacker. Meloetta's still great at donking people. Donking people is very good. Don't underestimate the power of the turn 1 donk that Meloetta gains, especially when you're going to be playing against a lot of Lugias, right? So, yeah, Meloetta's really good. Fusion Mew, I think, is still a good deck. Again, Spiritomb is nowhere to be seen. You just gotta, figure out the Charizard matchup, and I think you're chilling. But yeah, ultimately, I think Fusion is better than DT right now. Palkia Chien-Pao is probably tier 2. I think this deck is fine. It's a decent middle ground deck right now. I think it's bad matchups are going to be bad, though. I think its matchup against Lugia isn't great. Specifically, Single Strike is not great. Depending on whether or not you're playing Temple or Lost City, Maybe you can fix the matchup. It also has a pretty shaky matchup against Charizard. Palkia's Charizard matchup isn't good. You don't really trade that well into them. You can try to, get the early Greninja KO before they evolve, but it's unlikely. When they just bench Manaphy, that becomes almost impossible. Palkia doesn't trade that well into Charizard. You do have the ability to maybe save Star Portal for like a big Chien-Pao knockout on Charizard, but I still think the matchup is a little shaky, and that's kind of the ultimate thing that holds Palkia Chien-Pao back. Not a terrible deck, though. It's kind of just a middle-of-the-road deck right now. Probably just a Tier 2 deck. Control, yeah. So Control's, it's cool. It did gain Erica's Invitation, which is a decent upgrade. Control's weird, though. With how many different decks are on the meta, it's kind of hard to adapt. I mean, you have to kind of play like a toolbox-style deck. I think Mimikyu's decent right now. Control can beat Charizard. I think right away, like, Control can probably just beat Charizard flat out. A good Control player can probably just beat Charizard. Those Lost Zone matchups are going to be tricky. Lugia might be a little tricky, too. Control is probably tier 2.5. I can't really put in the rogue bad category because there might be somebody that does well with it, and Control is actually having some relevant placements in online tourneys right now. Not good enough to like warrant it any higher than tier 2.5. Probably like bottom of tier 2.5, like just barely in tier 2.5 even. And then Blastoise, United Wings, I'll put in Rogue Bad. United Wings is a deck people want to hold on to. I will say this, United Wings is apparently doing well in Japan right now that Jirachi's a thing. So we might see United Wings pop back up afterwards. But Blastoise probably Rogue. I'm going to put it on the tier list, though, because I think somebody actually would play Blastoise. It's one of those cards that somebody could play to Peoria. But here is my Peoria tier list. I think right now the two BDIFs is still going to be Tina and Gardy. Still maybe the two big decks. Probably going to change. I think Guardy's going to stay in BDIF, but I think Tina's going to fall after Peoria. But going into Peoria, Tina's still like a BDIF. A very safe default pick for people going into this regionals. Charizard is starting to do well now, and Charizard is starting to rise in stocks. I think Arvinzard is tier 1. The other Zard builds are probably tier 1.5. Colorless Lugia and the two Turbo Lost Zone decks are also extremely good. Single Strike maybe is a tier 1 deck, but I'm going to keep it in tier 1.5. But yeah, that's my tier list right now. I think this tier list is pretty decent, hopefully. I mean, hope y'all don't roast me for my takes here on the meta. But I hope you enjoyed the video here. Again, I will leave a link to the tier list down below. And I hope that some of y'all going to Peoria do well. And hopefully maybe this tier list gives you an idea of what you're going to play and maybe what you want to play to the tournament. I will do a meta predictions video for Peoria very soon on the channel here. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you all later. Bye-bye.